This message comes from our 2022 lead sponsor of NPR Music, State Farm. To celebrate their surprisingly great rates, State Farm invites you to discover the surprisingly great genre space music. With its ambient roots, space music has tranquil, relaxing sounds that will transport you to a different galaxy. If you're looking for something out of this world to vibe out to during your next listening party, space music is your jam. Make sure to check out space music, then check out State Farm's surprisingly great rates. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hi, I'm Ann Powers, critic and correspondent for NPR Music. We are gathered here today for a very special listening party, a celebration of the life and music of our late friend and inspiration, Gregory Stephen Iron Man Tate, paradigm-shifting writer, composer, musician, and visionary. This gathering in love and listening is co-hosted by the Pop Conference, the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, and Critical Minded. We thank all of those who brought this together. Well, I feel that most of you who are with us today don't need me to read a long biography of Greg Tate because he was a central part of the way you think about music. But just for the record, I'll share a few facts. Gregory Stephen Iron Man Tate was a journalist, composer, critic, lyricist, musician, and cultural provocateur who resided on Harlem, New York's Sugar Hill. Born in Dayton, Ohio, Greg attended Howard University and later moved to New York, where he lived and worked until his passing on December 7th, 2021. Greg was universally mourned and remembered as a revolutionary force in Black thought, in American thought, in musical thought, in universal thought. Those lucky enough to know his music also mourned the loss of a dynamic force whose band, Burnt Sugar, the Orchestra Chamber, for 23 years has welcomed in many of New York's and the world's most daring musicians as, in Greg's words, and this is a quote from Greg, a territory band, a neo-tribal thing, a community hang, a society music guild aspiring to the condition of all that is molten, glacial, racial, spatial, oceanic, mythic, antiphonal, and telepathic. We all mourn the man who co-founded the Black Rock Coalition and who helped nurture the muses of so many musicians, including our esteemed panel gathered here today, as well as countless others. I could name them, but I think many of you know that Greg was a great mentor to so many. So I want to introduce you to our friends gathered today. Each has a remarkable biography, and forgive me for condensing your accomplishments so we can make more room for the music. But I'm going to start with Jared Michael Nickerson, is a bassist and co-founder and current CEO of Burnt Sugar Orchestra, the Chamber. An Ohioan by birth, Jared played in the great post-punk band Human Switchboard before moving to New York City, where he helped co-found the Black Rock Coalition. He's played with too many artists to list here, including Nona Hendrix, Wadada Leo Smith, Melvin Van Peebles, and Charlie Musselwhite. Most recently, Jared led Burnt Sugar as they played the closing night of this month's Afrofuturism Festival at Carnegie Hall. Next, we have the great Vernon Reid. According to Rolling Stone, one of the 100, and according to me, one of the 100 greatest guitarists of all time. He's best known as the leader of the Grammy-winning band Living Colour, founded in 1984, and that band is still around today. Vernon has also released several albums as a solo artist and with Vernon Reid and Mask, and collaborated with a host of greats, produced a host of greats, and has been called one of the most recognizable guitarists you'll ever hear. Also, want to welcome Matana Roberts, a groundbreaking saxophonist and self-taught mixed media composer who works in many different contexts, but who might be best known for their multi-volume conceptual work, Coin Coin, which to me is like the Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man of music, is just what I want to call it. Originally from Chicago, Matana was a member of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians from 2000 to 2009, and their projects include bands like Sticks and Stones and the Chicago Project, collaborations with filmmaker Laura Hanna and sound artist Kelly J. Jones, and the In Memoriam ongoing project, which responds to the works of others, including the sculptor Eva Hess and the dancer choreographer Pina Bausch. Through their life's work, Matana stands creatively in defiance of false hierarchies and divisions. And finally, we have Christina Wheeler, composer, vocalist, multi-instrumental electronic musician, and multimedia artist. Christina's sonic explorations include forays into a myriad of styles and forms. Previous projects include Wire Mouth, Floating People, and Blowout, and current and recent projects span solo song cycle series, instrumental improvisational compositions, immersive solo and ensemble-based multimedia performances, and generative installation projects. Many collaborations, of course. And at Lincoln Center, Christina premiered Randall Wolf's The Trick is to Keep Breathing and reprised the piece with the Sirius String Quartet. Most recently, she has a beautiful new album out that I recommend to all of you. It's called Songs of S&D. So, Western white supremacist culture has a hard time understanding that a person can be many things at once. When Greg Tate passed, most tributes, including ours at NPR Music that we published, focused on his writing, which absolutely changed the field for all of us music critics, and I believe for anyone thinking about American culture, diaspora culture, world culture. But Greg's music and his writing are inextricably linked, and the community he built through his work/play with Burnt Sugar and beyond presaged the current renaissance of boundary-eradicating music, reflecting the whole of the African diaspora. So let's play some music and celebrate Greg's incalculable contribution to our time on Earth. Can we hear the first track?
Charmer, he will disarm ya. He's a charmer, he will disarm ya.
Well, we brought Greg into the room with his voice on that track, The Charmer. Oh, and I want to say to all of you out there listening and joining us, please join us in the chat. Share your memories of Greg and your love for this music in the chat. So let's just, there's Greg. He's with us now, a true charmer. I love the call and response in that song. I wonder, Jared, I'll throw it to you. Tell us a little bit about that. One of the only vocal tracks we have from Greg, right?
Well, Greg had gotten to a point in recording where basically he was very, very into creating loops, especially rhythmic loops, drum loops. And then we would usually record at Luke Mon Brown's studio. Greg would come in with the loop, and then over 3 or 4 days, he would just invite various people over just to lay down whatever they felt. And so the final product was always a surprise to everyone because no one knew who was going to be on the track or how what you how what you recorded was going to be used. And so, of course, when that track appeared, we were all surprised because here it is, Greg decided to sing. And in a way, it's not surprising at all because the unscripted, the unexpected is what you could expect from Greg.
I wonder if I could just throw to the group, how would you define Burnt Sugar? A band, a convocation, an ongoing phenomenon? Give us some words to define Burnt Sugar.
You know, Greg was really into the Sun Ra Orchestra. He was really into the bands that were, I would say, either ostentatiously led or they evoked a certain principle, you know, like the Art Ensemble of Chicago. You know, and we saw the Art Ensemble of Chicago, you know, many times, and we saw Sun Ra together. You know, we saw Sun Ra at the Squat Theater, which is a legendary show back in the days when Mr. Ra was still with us. You know, and he, you know, Greg was also a big P-Funk. You know, George Clinton, P-Funk, and, you know, huge fan of that, and really made a very clear connection between the Sun Ra Orchestra and a certain period of P-Funk, the Mothership Connection, you know, period of P-Funk. So that was part of his thought process. And when he talks about the territory band, you know, type of thing, right? Well, this was something that the great, you know, late great Stanley Crouch, the critic, he had a whole thing about the way the bands in the bebop bands were in competition with one another. You know what I mean? And those bands were really from the Midwest, if you will. And, you know, they were from Kansas, you know, they were from New Orleans, they were from Chicago. And Greg was really taken with the idea of territory. So all of that, and he's a guitar player. You know, he was a guitar player. He's a guitar player the whole time. He was a big fan of Eddie Hazel, you know, the lead guitarist for Funkadelic, of course, Jimi Hendrix. And all of that combined with, I mean, the randomness of the city and the just extraordinary personages who would come from other places and wind up in Chicago or New York, Chicago, or LA, whatever. He really liked the fact of cities as magnets for people that didn't fit where they were. So they came to this kind of, rootless cosmopolitans, you know. So he was really, all of that, I think, was in his mind, and he, says, I'm going to start a band. And there's things, there's like little precedents that came along the way that were really sparked that process. Like I would say, Bob Wisdom, the great actor. Well, Bob Wisdom was a presenter. While Bob Wisdom was in charge of music at the Kitchen. And then one day, and he was in charge of music at the ICA in London. And then one day, Bob Wisdom said, I'm going to become an actor. He just completely upended his life. He just completely upended everything. And I remember that was such a bold thing, and Greg was like, he was not going to stay. He's a guitar player. He was not going to stay as a music critic. And, he said, I'm going to start a band, and that's pretty much the genesis of how that, but also the starting of the Black Rock Coalition and that bringing together many different artists and bands and had Jared had come in and was part of the early days of the Black Rock Coalition, and Greg, was like, I'm going to start my own band, which really music critics didn't put themselves in the arena in that way. They just didn't do it, and he just went all in.
Matana, you're from Chicago originally. I wonder if what Vernon's saying about the territory bands resonates for you. And you also worked with the ACM, so I wonder if that resonates with you.
Sure. Yes, my time with the AACM was rather brief, though. I'm not really able to comment on the structure of the organization, but I can say that I did become a member of the BRC for a time when I came to New York. And for me, I also grew up with a lot of Sun Ra, art ensemble, all these things. But Burnt Sugar really represented New York. Like, it really had a very particular sound that was only possible in New York. I remember my first couple gigs with Burnt Sugar at Tonic. I swear there were at least 30 people on the stage, and you had everything from tuba to banjo strung across the stage. And I remember thinking, like, wow, okay, this is New York. This is wild. Like, all these sounds, and how is it possible that anybody's ever going to organize not only all these sounds, but with all those musicians, you had such an array of incredible personalities. And Burnt Sugar became, for me, like this umbrella of possibility where all these people came together that Greg and Jared brought together, that all of a sudden became its own organism, went together, went together in sound, went together. When traveling with Burnt Sugar is an incredible experience. You never run out of someone to talk to. There's always someone to talk to. You get tired of someone, go talk to someone else. And go back and forth. And then at the center of all this, you have Greg, who always had this sort of energy that sort of represented this territorial sound, not in a sense of like, this is New York, and no, but of a sense of here's what's possible, and here's what we have for you. You can take it or leave it, but we'll enjoy the ride along the way.
Oh, I love that. Christina, I see you. Yeah, jump on.
I would also add that Greg very much was inspired by the conduction systems of Butch Morris, and that was a very significant part of the band. For those who aren't familiar, Butch Morris, composer, cornetist, creator of his own very special, beautiful personal conduction system. What a conduction is, it's a way of organizing improvisation so that we would have systems and signs that you could use, and you could tell people while you're playing, bring these people in, bring this out, there's a theme, play this theme, so that you have a way to communicate while you're in the midst of making music. So Greg was very much inspired by the system, and we used it in the band. So for the few times that I came and I played with the band, I had to pull out, was familiar with Butch Morris's conduction system beforehand, and I had to pull it out and reacquaint myself with it. But it really superseded any kind of stylistic idea. Like anything and everything that people wanted to bring to the occasion, they could. And there really was, I think, for Greg, that kind of real freedom to say, bring all of the music that you make, everything that you do. You don't have to be in a bag or a style or limited to a very specific category that you're playing. And you really did feel within the wholeness, the holistic wholeness of the group, all of those different inputs and influences and styles all coming together to make this beautiful myriad of sound that shifted and morphed and changed, whether it was pure improvisation in a moment, whether it was shifting to an interpretation of another composer or songwriter's music. That freedom, I think, always stayed very present in the expression of the group. And that came from Greg's vision of what he wanted to accomplish.
I'm so glad you mentioned the conducting system, because there's also beautiful images in my mind of the dance of Greg conducting. Like
there are some photos of him literally looking like he has jumped up and he's levitating in the air, and that the music has brought him flying. Really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, let's hear another track. Let's hear some more music. We're going to hear Young Frankenstein featuring Lisala and Vernon Reid.
Frankenstein and Frankenstein and
Wow, the tone on the guitars in that track, the multi-vocality. Vernon, tell us about making that track.
Yeah, so he was doing this record. It's kind of an offshoot of Burnt Sugar called Rebellum, and he'd asked me to play on a track, and I went up to Lukman Brown's spot, and I think he used every take. I think it was kind of like, okay, play this thing. I played it one time, then play the next time. Okay, and play. And I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna pick out the best, and then when I heard it back, I said he used like every pass, and he used every pass and every sound from every pass. You know, it was funny because also I have brought a guitar that essentially a fan of Living Colour. You know, we were playing. It was the 25th anniversary of our first record, Vivid, and a fan had built this guitar and had a little 25 on it, and it was kind of a tribute to the thing. And it was kind of weird because I have like guitars that I play all the time that I'm very comfortable with playing. And I just said, let me just see if this guitar is cool. I'll bring it. You know what I mean? And he was so taken with it that I think I had another guitar. I said, no, I keep using that one. You know, so that's the one time I've recorded with that instrument. That's it, pretty much. So, you know, Greg was funny that way. He would like say, man, do that, like that. I like that, you know. And yeah, and I use a lot of Space Station, which is kind of the company Digitech. They made the whammy pedal, which is kind of like almost like a pitch wheel for guitar, right? And for other instruments. And this is a sound you hear it. Tom Morello used this with Rage Against the Machine, and they're famous for that, and Greg loved that effect. And in fact, when Renee Khan played in the band, he had Renee Khan using whammy pedal like all the time. But they made this other thing called Space Station, and it allows you to do this almost thing where it sounds like if you took a tape, if your guitar was on tape, and you put your hand on the tape and totally slow the tape down, it could make that effect in real time. And then that's the sound you hear where the pitch kind of goes and stops, and that's all Space Station. And Greg loved that effect, and he said, man, I want you to do that. So there it is.
Sort of a turntable effect, but on guitar.
Kind of a turntable, yeah. You could do turntables and backwards things, and it's a favorite.
Very cool. I wonder, Matana and Christina, both of you as like sound collagists, people who work with tape, and I know Greg was deeply inspired by Teo Macero's work with Miles Davis, of course, and what you hear in what Vernon's describing, that putting things together, creating something, a pastiche, if you will. How important was pastiche in his approach?
It seemed to be the basis of everything. When you listen to those Miles Davis recordings, for instance, I remember the first time when I realized, is it the musicians that I'm liking, or is it the production? Like, what is of course, genius musicians, but the combination of that genius plus genius production is a whole other world. And it seems to me like Greg really understood the possibilities with that in terms of how he tried to work in the studio, how he tried to work on stage, with his conduction system, which I have to say, from being conducted by Butch Morris and being conducted by Greg, is very different. Like it's like there was an exactitude. There was a very strict, loving exactitude to Butch Morris's conduction. There was also an exactitude to Greg's, but it had a fervor that was very different. And so I feel like the pastiche that he was after had a lot of fire. And when I played in the band, I only play saxophone, always alto. And man, he worked me on that horn. Like I always felt like, okay, I did my job. In terms of the things that he was hearing, he was very, very particular. So I would say pastiche, but very visionary in terms of that pastiche in real time.
What do you think, Christina's response?
I think that, well, the thing that I'm really familiar with is the work that Greg was doing at home ahead of time. So he would put together, like you were saying, these loops, but they were all quite beautifully intricate, and they had so many different sources and places that he would pull materials from, and you could really hear in the foundational materials that were coming into each of these tracks that he had gone anywhere he wanted to go, pulling things in all different kinds of ways. And again, I would reiterate for the time when I went to Lukman's and did my recording, I did all kinds of stuff, but then the end result, you really had no idea how it was going to turn out. And speaking of which, Vernon, that is a beautiful effect to do. I've done it before, where you do a bunch of takes and then you just pull them all up and you let them all go. So I'm not surprised that, that was part of the equation. But I don't think that the pastiches were like patchworks. They were very super conceived, and Greg had such big ears that he really, really heard a vision for what he wanted the tracks and for what he wanted the music to come out and sound like. So it was very consciously and mindfully conceived and created, I think. So.
Well, Christina, you brought in a track from a different project, which we're going to hear next. Let's hear this track. The group is called, okay, I'm going to have you introduce it. I don't want to mispronounce. I'm going to say Bakol.
I think it's pronounced the Bakol.
The Bakol.
And Bakol is a trio project that was convened with me and Satch Hoyt, who's also one of the original members of Burnt Sugar. And the Bakol means the number 3 in Dogon. And this particular group was very much inspired and motivated by Afrofuturism. We had very long, deep conversations about the content, what each one of us believed. I was also interested in the nature of family histories of magic and how that's a part of Afro-diasporal traditions. Most of my family's originally from New Orleans, so it's been a part of my family culture ever since I was a little girl. So we had long conversations about this, the content, the lyrics that were written contributed also to the work of the group. And this was a project that was much more known in Europe because we performed in Berlin in Germany and also in London. We did a recording and a video, and there is documentation of all the songs. I'm really happy that we have this legacy with Greg to share with people.
Let's hear this next track from the Bakol.
With energy conjoins to one cosmic
I love that visual too. To be able to see all that array of those instruments that Satch is dealing with, and you with the auto harp. So tell us a little bit about that track.
The recording of it was actually pretty similar to other stories that people have been telling about recording with Greg, where Satch and I went into the studio together at Jean-Paul Borelli's studio when he had it in Berlin. We recorded, and then those materials went back to Greg, and then Greg went in and worked his Greg magic, and the thing that came out was really quite different than all of the different recordings that we did. It was more like, okay, there's something in your inbox. And we opened up like, oh, okay, this is what this is now. And then similarly, when we put the video together, it was each of us contributing materials to that. And that's what we saw that turned out. I'm trying to think what other stories I have to tell. You can hear at the end of that particular track, and also in the middle, some of the loops that Greg made, because his beats and his loop sounds were very particular. What was the music there in the video was a short segment of a much longer piece, so they were quite extended audio tracks. So.
Well, and we get to see Greg playing guitar in that track, which makes me want to throw back to a very different project, Women in Love, from the very beginning. I mean, yes. Greg was a guitarist, and like a rocker, and I don't know. I want to ask Vernon to share some memories of Women in Love.
Well, I'm going to throw to Jared.
Fair. Jared, come on.
Okay. Pass accepted. Well, and Women in Love was really sort of like the precursor to Burnt Sugar. Mm-hmm. It was almost like Greg's sort of like small playground in where he combines an acoustic bassist, Jason DiMatteo, Burnt Sugar, Louis Flip Barnes on trumpet, Burnt Sugar, Mikhail Banks on vocals and effects and sounds, Burnt Sugar, Helga Davis, operatic singer, vocalese expert. She's performed with Burnt Sugar occasionally, but wasn't like a core member. I'm not sure who the drummer was in the band. Does anybody remember? I say this to say that basically that was the band, Greg's band right before Burnt Sugar. And Greg had plenty of bands. Mm-hmm. It's not like these are the only two bands Greg had maybe through his career, maybe about 7 or 8 or 9 bands. Mac Diva was one.
Oh, yeah.
He had Rivers on Mars with Avram Pfeiffer. Tarmac was another. He had a number of bands. And I just think by the time Women in Love, when that dissolved, and his infatuation with Butch Morris's conduction system, plus his love for the art ensemble and for P-Funk and for Bad Brains and for anything that was really popping, how could he construct something that could include all that? And also, how could he construct something where, a lot of times you're in a band, and if your technical expertise isn't up to a certain standard, there's certain material you can't play. And so the thing with Burnt Sugar, Greg never made that part of the equation. Basically, he wanted everybody to be comfortable and giving, and to do that, you have to be comfortable in knowing that what you possess at that time is enough. And he made everybody feel comfortable with that. And that's why the band has such a long and storied personnel list over 23 years, because folks could come in Burnt Sugar, and the things that maybe they couldn't play under other band leaders, or couldn't really get into the space because they were a band leader themselves and were spinning so many plates, they could completely relax in Burnt Sugar and play what they felt and surprise themselves. And when they surprised themselves, they would surprise us. and it just became to be sort of like this vast circular creative, you know, hurricane, tornado that to this day exists and can go forward because of the construct that Greg developed. And I'd just like to say at this time, I'm not a co-founder of Burnt Sugar.
Oh, my
Burnt
mistake.
Sugar is Greg's construct alone. I was basically invited to the first jam session. And after our first presenter was Hilly Crystal at CBGB's, where he invited us into his underground club. And that's where the first two Burnt Sugar gigs happened, with Bruce Mack and Ronnie Drayton and Michael Morgan Kraft and Trevor Holder.
What year was that, Jared? What year?
This is like 99 maybe,
Yeah.
maybe 98.
Yeah.
Simi Stone was part of that group. And we did a few of those shows. And right after those shows, Greg took the band into the studio to record Blood on the Leaf, the first recording. Also, I'm not a co-founder of the Black Rock Coalition. That was strictly Condom Mason, Vernon Reid, and Greg Tate, where my involvement with the BRC was that I came in to be its first director of operations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for correcting the historical record. I was giving you too much credit. Or different credit. Different credit.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. That's true. The founder was also Craig Street, as well.
Oh, yes, Craig Street. Props
Craig
to
Street,
Craig.
Street.
Craig Street. It was Craig Street that came up with the name, Black Rock Coalition.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, Women in Love makes me think about the heyday, the original energy of the Black Rock Coalition, and Jared, your comments make me think about the spirit of punk, and something that I believe Brian Tate said to Greg once about Bad Brains, that's a band with fear of no music, and and I just wondered if any of y'all had a comment about like that spirit of punk music that was part of it, because we and especially the place of bands like Bad Brains, and I want to say Fishbone, maybe, I don't know.
Fishbone, Fishbone, absolutely, because Fishbone, I mean, I think that first record is 84. Yeah, they come up really early. Well, Bad Brains, I mean, they were a band, they were catalysts. I mean, they're the band that catapulted punk into hardcore. Like, and the fact that they were a regional band, they're from D.C., from Washington, D.C., and Greg lived, he went to Howard. So the fact that they were from D.C., and that was a big part of the identity of that band. And that first, the Roar cassette, the legendary cassette with Band in D.C., one of the great early tunes, and they were and to me, that first record was such a revelation, because you think about Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, which in and of itself is a terrific recording, but that Bad Brains original record was the equal to Nevermind the Bollocks. To me, in terms of the quality of the tunes, how uncompromising it was. Both of those records are essentially manifestos, and that's the thing about Earl, Daryl Jennifer, Dr. No, and HR. I mean, those shows. It's almost the Bad Brains shows from the 80s. Into the early 90s, I mean, were unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like, you never saw a band like that. And they reset the clock. They set a new tone, I think.
Yeah.
Because on one, because punk was becoming new wave, right?
Yeah.
And what had happened with the Bad Brains, like, because originally it was a fashion statement. It was a band, but it was also meant as a fashion statement, and it kind of this split and into kind of fashion and music as well. but that gritty, God Save the Queen, that's in Anarchy in the UK. That energy was split off, and that's like the Bad Brains energy. Split that off into Black Flag and all that kind of stuff, which is also from California, right? But
right,
yeah,
right.
They were a big
But
part of it.
when you were starting the Black Rock Coalition, were you feeling like, wow, that was that energy was an important part of Black Rock Coalition from the beginning?
It started out as a head check. I mean, the thing about the Black Rock Coalition was that it was basically, okay, is it me? Because we're talking about the '80s. And the velvet rope scenarios of the downtown scene. This is like Clubland, because you could divide the '80s from the early the election of Reagan up to '85, '86, and then the AIDS crisis hits, right? And the '80s are kind of divided up like that. So in the early part of it, and this is when, because of the financial crash in the late '70s, rents were really cheap. And commercial rents were really cheap, and there was a proliferation of clubs like everywhere, right? And a lot of those kind of racial dynamics, which never seemed to go away, they started to show up in the club scenario. Who got gigs? Who could attend? Who could go to clubs? Like you would go like say, okay, I was just at Danceteria, and then you go the next night and you can't get in. Because what's that about, right? So it was very much those kind of dynamics. And that first phone call to call people together in '85 was about, well, yo, is it me? Because I went to see I and I, Melvin Gibbs' band with D.K. Dyson. And that was the first band outside of Herbie Hancock that had a DJ. It was the first rock band to have a DJ as a regular member. DJ Logic. He was 17 years old. That was the first band to have a DJ as a regular member of the band. And in fact, it was also this collision because hip hop and funk the funk people did not like hip hop. Like, so people get it all twisted, right? Like we're all a happy family moving forward. No, the jazz people and the funk people, they were like, that's kiddie music. That ain't gonna go to what's that about, right? And Greg was one of the first critics to identify that this was a brand new thing coming into the mix. That this is important. So for Melvin to have a DJ, because it was like that is in fact, he had a cat that left the band because he couldn't be in a band with somebody with a turntable. Right, so those things were very much a part. Anyway, I went to a gig. It was CBJ. There was nobody at the gig. I went and saw ISIS, and it was like low attendance. And I was just like, "Yo, is it me?" You know what I mean? I'd started Living Color, and I was like going. So I called a bunch of my friends. Just called people. And it was like, we wound up going to Linda Bryant's gallery, just above Midtown Gallery, and that was the first meeting. And it was really almost like group therapy session or something. We all got together, and then Greg Tate said, well, what are we going to do about it? So in terms of the founding, it's like I made the first phone call, right? But it was Greg that said, well, what we going to do? And we met, like we did, like we got together. Let's do it. Let's get together again next week. So we got together again, and then, but it was, so what we going to do? And that's how the Black Rock Coalition really started.
Well, Matana, go ahead. I was gonna just ask you about you joined Black Rock Coalition when you came to New York, right? Did you join right when you came, or?
Yeah, but in most of the organizations that I've been a part of, it's always been kind of from a distance. It's kind of been more about just being around the flavor, and for me, thinking about punk rock spirit, for me, from where I come from, it's the original form of blackness for me. It's the original legacy about not asking. I don't have to ask permission about what it is that I want to do, and to always be suspicious of those who question my ability to do the things that I want to do. And for me, that's also, I mean, if we're going to talk about the AACM, that's also kind of part of the energy. We're going to talk about Sun Ra. That's also the part of the energy. We can go back to Miles Davis. That's also part of the energy. We can talk about P-Funk, also part of the energy in different sorts of areas. And I feel like Greg also came through, you know, what I consider some of the best years of hip hop. We have lots of different discussions about this, but like the pinnacle, that pinnacle moment of understanding the power of the sample, you know, just sort of running all through and being able, and to have the big ears to bring in all the disparate elements that are not necessarily, you know, getting along. But he seemed to figure out a way to flood it up. But for me, New York was very much about, there just seemed to be, you know, like attending a punk show in the Midwest and being the only Black kid at the punk show, right? And coming to New York and being like, oh, and Burnt Sugar, and being like, oh, I see me. I see other versions of me with this same spirit. Burnt Sugar also had, there are people that came through Burnt Sugar that I only met once, and all had a very ethereal quality of sort of moving in and out of the ensemble. Again, in this spirit of not asking permission. Again, with the foundation of what I imagine the BRC was really about. What I imagine the Burnt Sugar as a, you know, band was really about. But the foundation that the BRC planted for Burnt Sugar, I think really fed through the entire ensemble and still does, I would say. I mean, I haven't played the band in a long time, but still does, I would say.
I would love to hear another Burnt Sugar track that you played on, Matana. It's called Naomi's Lullaby, and this was written by you, Jared. So let's hear Naomi's Lullaby. Naomi's Lullaby. That's so beautiful. Tell us a little bit about that track.
Well, Jared.
We have the two principals here.
I want to hear Jared first, and then I'll add, because I didn't write it.
Well, but you did.
I did.
You did, because even though I did write the chord changes and the structure, you laid a lovely melody on top that basically, to me, is considered writing. It's
All
considered
right.
writing because I think that, and that's probably been a problem in music for a long time, where people have contributed to tracks that they didn't get credit for. And that's the one thing about Burnt Sugar. If you look at the listings of the writers on a lot of the tunes, you'll see the whole band. Because the whole band contributed to that track, even if it was just hand claps, whatever it was. And we always felt that it was important to be a community that shares and celebrates each other. And as with the BRC, when Greg said, "Well, what are we going to do about it?" and I came to a few meetings and heard that, and I was kind of fortunate, blessed actually, to enter the New York music scene in the '80s with a band from Cleveland, as you mentioned, Human Switchboard, and so we were playing like Danceteria, Peppermint Lounge with Jim Farrat, CBGB's 930 Club in DC. We were doing the whole circuit. We got to the point where like we were one of Maxwell's in Hoboken, of course, with
Yes.
Steve Fallon. We became one of CBGB's New Year's Eve bands. And as everybody knows, back in those days, for you to be a New Year's Eve band in one of the major clubs, I mean, you were a big stepper. I mean, they felt good about you, that you would bring people on what was a very competitive night in New York back in the '80s. So I got to know presenters as from the warmth, from the embrace of a successful band. So then, when I entered into the BRC, I mean, one of the thoughts was CBGB's had this policy of audition night, where basically you had to come in, sign up. You would come in, present your band, and they would grade you on your presentation. They would grade you on how many folks you brought through the door. And I'm sure, they didn't say this, but they'd also grade how much liquor did those folks consume and all that kind of stuff. And then if you did well, then you'd be invited back. And back in those days, CBs had 5 and 6 members, 5 or 6 bands per night. And you could just through CBGBs alone work up from being an unknown band to being a headliner. And these bands, the black bands that were coming to the meetings, the band leaders were saying they went through all the steps and they believed that they had successfully qualified but weren't getting the callbacks. So I could go in and speak to Hilly and Louise, his assistant at that time. They were pretty much co-running the place. Speak to them as friends, not even speak to them as like a musician or anything like that. And I said, this doesn't really sound like what I'm experiencing. And they sort of looked into it and then decided like to be proactive and allowed us to do the very first Stalking Heads Festival, 2 nights, completely programmed by us. And that really sort of, when back in those days, CBGB's was sort of like the Hollywood Bowl of New York. There were all kinds of eyes on it, and when we were able to present that festival, that immediately brought us to the attention of everyone. And from then it was like there were people in St. Louis, there were people in Des Moines, Iowa, who said, "Oh look, we have people. We have people." And that's what really sort of like initiated the spread of everything. So, to bring it back to Burnt Sugar, the fact that sort of like forceful inclusiveness that the BRC sort of like fostered is the same thing that Burnt Sugar is built on. It's built on allowing you to be you, to the utmost that you can be, and just asking that. Now, of course, there's going to be some bumps in the road with that. There are going to be some collisions with that of personality and of musical construct and everything like that. But the thing is if you have an open playing field, you can allow for that to happen, and it doesn't destroy the basic premise. Basically, what it does is just sort of like highlights the differences, and then everybody sort of like absorbs those, meld those, and we become even a stronger unit.
That's so beautifully said. And Matana, I want to let you respond. As you entered into Burnt Sugar, like what did it mean to you as you developed? What did it give you as an artist who working toward making your own extraordinary work as well?
Well, again, it was a bit of a cross section, because just hearing all these connections of being able to play 6 degrees of separation. So by the time I came to New York, there was a free jazz series happening in the basement of CBGB's, run by Depop from the Bush Tetras, and I was getting free slots there for passing out flyers when people still passed out flyers from gigs, right? And so being able again to be in a city where you knew there's still some of these divisions that are still happening, unfortunately, but that you knew they were very clearly happening, but you kept running into people who were trying to make sure that you understood that the power was in the cross section of things. The power is in imagining space where there is no space. The power is in carving out. So when I hear that recording, for instance, like I don't even play like that anymore, which is so interesting to hear. Like it's so interesting to hear that time capsule, because at that time I was making my living as a street musician and playing in the subway, and my chops were different, going towards a different sort of focus, where now, thanks to Burnt Sugar and all the opportunities that I got from moving through Burnt Sugar, I'm trying to question what is music, what is sound in a lot of my work. And I'm pushing further and further towards abstraction in a way that sometimes makes me a little uncomfortable, but has been really interesting. And then coming back into Burnt Sugar music, and being reminded, oh yeah, there's that strength too. Like there's a lot to my love of the saxophone is very clearly on that track, and my love of playing in that band was very clearly there. I remember when we recorded that, and there was this period where I was taught to always ask questions. If you're somewhere new, seek out people who have, been around the scene, been in the scene. So there are lots of people I was leaning on a lot when I first got to New York. It was Vijay Iyer, one, who was the first person to tell me about Burnt Sugar, I think. And I actually met Greg while I was playing on the subway platform.
Wow.
He came up to me. He was with Latasha Diggs, another wonderful member of the ensemble when I came in. And one of the things I just want to really point out is like the room, I identify as genderqueer, but the room for people with ovaries and Burnt Sugar was always wide. There was no, weirdness around every woman has a story about, being in bands and blah, blah, blah. But the love for folks with ovaries and Burnt Sugar and the plethora of diversity amongst women in Burnt Sugar was a really, really powerful thing. Greg was one of the people that I often wrote to just asking questions. Sometimes I would complain about some things I was experiencing. And he often gave me a really firm talking to about, just keep your head down and do the work. Just keep your head down and do the work. And that really helped me to, just like black out on the noise. It's not about the tools, it's about the vision, and just keep going. And it was always this silent. I feel like Greg was a man of so many words on paper and a man of so many words and sound, but talking to me, like was always, he said just enough that needed to be said that you needed to hear. And I just feel like that really helped to catapult me into remembering my possibilities are limitless. That's what I really got from Burnt Sugar, that the possibilities are limitless. There's no such thing as lack. Your mindset is everything in terms of how you're trying to think about sound, how you're thinking about music. And again, remember, you don't have to ask permission to do what it is you really want to do. You just need to have the fearlessness to do it. And however it pans out, that's not the point. The point is just moving through process. And that's what I feel like I really got from Greg and from everyone in Burnt Sugar, really. Just the collective energy of that ensemble.
That's beautifully said. That's beautifully said. And yes, what you said about people with ovaries, I think, is such an important part of Greg's legacy. He was a mentor to so many women writers and so many people with ovaries who are also writers. And also, this is not bound to gender, but Greg's sense of beauty, of beauty. And the art you see, the visual aspects, the natty aspect of Burnt Sugar too, the presentations, his own style, and the voice. And I feel that the track we heard that emphasized guitar, this track we just heard with you playing saxophone, Christina, the experimental track that we heard, there is a vocality and a stress, an emphasis on beauty that's really important. I wondered, Christina, if you had any thoughts on particularly vocality in Burnt Sugar music and the voice and the importance of that.
Greg was an absolute and complete, utter lover of the voice, and particularly in the wide breadth of all the different vocalists that he had come into Burnt Sugar. There were consistently anywhere from 2 to 3, 4, 5 people singing, and each person's voice was amazing, special, beautiful, particular. And as I was listening to you talking, Matana, I was thinking about how Greg had so much loving generosity for everybody that was in his sphere. I always felt like he had my back 1,000%. Any ideas, no matter how out there they were, he absolutely reveled in them, and he encouraged them, and he really encouraged me to just like go to the outer limits and beyond for whatever I was trying to devise, to conceive. He was in my corner. He would take and again, as you were sharing, Matana, he would talk about how it was like just enough that was said that then would propel you to kind of think further about the next stages that you wanted to go to. And I cannot like share how much love and 1,000% support there was there all the time. I think oftentimes musicians and artists can live in some sort of place of scarcity and lack and feeling kind of territorial, but Greg was so utterly open and expansive and inclusive with everybody, making so much room for family, for everybody to be included. I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but I'm getting a little emotional about this. But that is the hugeness and the beautifulness that he was. And I think we really feel that his legacy through all of us exponentially, what we shared with him, what he brought to us, what we brought back, what we all made together as community, as family, will continue as a legacy that will go on and on. And I'm so deeply grateful to have had Greg in my life and to have shared making music with him. He's with me always.
That is a beautiful lead into to our next track, which shows how Burnt Sugar is living on. And Jared, I'm going to ask you to set up this track, Lisala over Ina Okanda. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear.
Well, this track here is actually Burnt Sugar at its finest in the pandemic, because we kind of went from initially, basically, Greg would conduct the band. Like, let's take the very first recording, Blood on the Leaf. Basically, after those shows at CB's Underground, he took us right into Peter Carl's studio in Brooklyn. And we just started to record things. He had a few motifs that he wanted to build on. And then basically, Greg created that just like as if it was a Miles Davis record, where he would cut and splice and and maybe put something together and then have maybe, somebody come in, Avram Pfeiffer or Louis Flip Barnes or Micah Gal come in and do some recording, or you'd have Lisala Beatty or Maz Swift come in and do some vocals or play some violin. And then he would sort of construct it. And as we've said before, no one would really know the final product until it was actually released. With Angels Over Wakanda, there was a session in 2018 that he brought the band together to play over a loop. And after we did that, basically that recording sat on the shelf for maybe 2 years. And because of the pandemic, since no one could get together, yet we felt it was time to release something. And technology, as far as recording and the digital process being as far advanced as it is now, we were able to put together the recording with Mark Gilmore, the Innermost, being in Stockholm, Sweden, Satch Hoyt being in Berlin, Fee Jeffrey Smith's studio in Jersey City. We used all these locations to put this together. Now, the tune that you're going to listen to, that the audience is going to listen to now, basically it's a snippet of Angels Over Wakanda reconstructed by Mark Gilmore, that Greg wrote some lyrics and handed them to Lisala Beatty, who recorded the lyrics and did all the background vocal harmonies in her studio in East Orange, New Jersey. So, I mean, it was sort of like probably the first recording where we didn't really actually do a lot of gathering, and Greg didn't do a lot of shepherding himself. The band now actually has about 12 conductors amongst the ensemble, which Greg allowed, because originally he was the only conductor. But now we have about 12, and because of that, now it's almost like, I said at the memorial, as a parent, you would probably want your child, when you passed, you would probably want your child not only to be able to survive, but to thrive. And as sad as it is, and was at that time, and will be, that Greg is no longer with us, the band, he put the band in a position that it can go on for as long as people want to go on with it. And that's like, I mean, what more can you ask for? Like, people always ask about the band, like, well, is this show a tribute to Greg, or is this going to be a memorial? It's like, there's no need to say that. Every time we play, it's a tribute to him. And so that's why I left those two words to the Tate family. If there's going to be a tribute or memorial, that's really their realm, for them to celebrate and acknowledge their family member. But as far as the band moving forward, every note we play, wherever we play.
It's beautifully said. I'm really touched by that. Let's hear this track, Lisala Over Wakanda.
Angels over Wakanda.
You're slipping away from my sympathy, fast being erased from any empathy, taking my blues back and all my unruly symphonies, maroon terrain, subject to pain, maroon terrain, a whole new world again. Angels over Wakanda. been torn asunder. The angels of Wakanda, avengers of the terrors and the plunder. Angels of Wakanda, the true panther mothers, the true panther, the true panther mothers, the true panther mothers, the true panther mothers, angels of Wakanda, Wakanda,
Well, I hope everyone got up and did a little dancing during that one. That lifts us up, that beat. I love it so much. I wish we could stay and continue to play tracks for each other and share stories about Greg all day, because there's so much. I mean, just the sheer cornucopia of Burnt Sugar music alone. It can take over your life. I'll attest to that. And it should take over your life for at least a little while. So I want to encourage everyone to explore Burnt Sugar's vast catalog. But as we go out, before we hear the last track, I just want to ask each of you, if anyone would like to share, how does Greg's musicality live on for you in your heart, in your playing, in your approach?
It's reminding me to keep, it's reminding me to not give up, to keep moving forward, because I know Greg would want to be here to keep moving forward. He had so much more he was going to do, so now it's up to us. We have to carry on that energy.
I would say that it lives on with me in his absolute unswerving belief in courage and courageousness, that to keep moving forward in the face of fear towards expansiveness no matter what, which I think is a good definition of courage, and to follow my absolute, visions and dreams creatively, no matter how out they are, just go for them. And as Matana was also saying, to not give up, to keep moving and keep getting the music out there in the world, because if we don't do it, the world doesn't get it. And we also bring Greg's legacy with us as we keep sharing our music out in the world. Lastly, I'd also like to acknowledge Jan Heinrich, who was responsible for the video that we saw with The Bakol. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's very daunting in a way, because he was such an important cultural figure, but he was a personal friend. I mean, he was a dear friend, and that part of it is the most it's one of the most powerful aspects of it, because here's a person who had a vision for the way the world could be, and he also saw each of us in an exalted light. Like, he really saw us as the best of what we're capable of. And if anything, part of his legacy is to encourage others to be themselves, to encourage, to really take, when you see a young person and you see what they're trying to do, and, encourage, be positive, not false, right? It's not everyone gets a statue, no. But it's about seeing into who people have the possibility of becoming, and encourage people to become what's possible and to take the unexpected chance in life. That's really how any and all of this happened. And I could say directly in my own life, is a lot of unexpected, unintended consequences. And when one of those things was meeting Greg Tate after a defunct show at the 930 Club in D.C., changed my life for the best, And and he did that for scads of people. If you had that spark of life in you and light, it didn't matter what your packaging was. His project was against white supremacy, and his project was to exalt African American peoples. But he was not at all. I mean, if he saw that light coming from you, that was it. And that's a beautiful thing about him.
Absolutely.
I'd like to go back to what Christina said when she said he had the ultimate big ears. Because not only did he have big ears, and by big ears, I mean, and this isn't a musical thing. This is a thing as part of his essence, is that he heard people. Mm-hmm. People felt they were being heard. Mm-hmm. They could be comfortable saying things to Greg that they might not say to anyone else because they knew that he wouldn't judge them on it. That is a very, very rare quality to have. And then you add the big ears to the big heart. The big heart, which embraced people's concerns and aspirations. We've all been sort of befuddled as to why somebody of Greg's stature never received the MacArthur Award or any of these other huge awards. And let me tell you, that can embitter genius. But it never embittered Greg. And please, let's not mince words. Greg was genius. Mm-hmm. He was a genius. And what I tell folks is that one of the benefits for Greg out of the burnt sugar construct was that we gave him his flowers every day. So he had a community of folk that loved him, respected him, and honored him. And because those are the things that he gave to us. He gave to us. So even though he's gone, once you sort of you have that in your system, once that as part of the DNA, it's I would think more than any award, the fact that the band continues and that the band continues to excite people, it will be a award enough for him.
And the band does continue and continues to tour and record and gain attention and acclaim and just be a beautiful community. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for Burnt Sugar. I'm so thankful for everything Greg gave to me as a mentor and writer as well. And to all of you, I just want to thank you all so much for sharing in this remembrance and in this celebration. And the music is here for us to love and dance to and listen to forever. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Again, thank you to this incredible panel of writers, thinkers, and musicians. We've all been touched by Greg's work and his friendship, his presence, which lives on. Jared Michael Nickerson, Vernon Reid, Matana Roberts, and Christina Wheeler. Thanks to the Pop Conference for co-hosting this conversation, to Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music for hosting the Pop Conference, and Critical Minded for sponsoring us this year. PopCon meant so much to Greg as well, and he was an integral presence in all that we did and continue to do. You can find much of Greg's writing online, and there's so many places to start, but I recommend both volumes of his essential anthologies, Flyboy and the Buttermilk, which genuinely changed writing, music writing, and cultural writing in general, and Flyboy too. Incredible books to read. And you can find his music as Burnt Sugar on Bandcamp and on burntsugarindex.com, and seek out the music of all of our panelists. So much rich music here. Burnt Sugar lives on, so keep an eye out for when the ensemble is next passing through your town. We're going to go out with one last track. Again, thank you all so much. I'm Ann Powers from NPR Music, and let's hear that last track. I'm going to ask Jared to introduce
before you go, thank you for having us.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this together.
oh well,
Thank you.
it had to happen. I mean, I'm just so moved. I'm so moved to be here with you today. I'm getting a little misty, but you know, if tears have been shed, many tears have been shed. But let's lift up our hearts in joy and in music, and hear this last track. Jared, can you tell us a little bit about this last track we're going to hear, and we'll go out on it. So thanks for all that have been with us in the chat. This last track is 10 minutes long, so dance your way to your fridge and get whatever beverage you need and have some fun listening to it. But Jared, tell us about this last track.
Well, and this last track is from a performance in Portland, Oregon. And we were actually on a West Coast swing, and this was like about our third date at a place called the Jack London Review. Mm-hmm. And this is a completely off the top of the dome improv conducted by Greg. And so I think it really sort of displays just the nimbleness of his mind and the nimbleness of the ensemble. And as Greg said, sort of like, you know, Mickey Mouse in Fantasia. think of that while you listen to this.
And the title I have is Kudank West Coast GT Off the Top of the Dome Conduction. Panelists, stay with me as we listen here so we can finish up our video. But thanks to everyone who's shared in this experience with us. Here we go.
So I said we played a game of conduction too. So that's what that sounds like, feels like, looks like.